there, welcome to my ceramic studio here at Mason High School. This video that I'm making today is really going to be an assistance for my fellow colleagues here at the high school who will also teach ceramics either with me or when I retire in a few years. I wanted to show them how I do the Raku firing process, how the kiln operates, and maybe it will help some of you out there if you're considering doing Raku sometime. Now, in full disclosure, I need to tell you I'm a fully self-taught Raku person. I have not taken a class specifically on it, which I really would like to someday. I did do a little Raku firing in college, but that was purely, I was just a student that stood on the side and I watched someone else do it. I didn't know that much about it. So my Raku kiln is an Olympic 18-inch. It is a natural gas kiln and it is permanently installed on my art patio out here. I will show that to you in a little bit, and I'm going to have to narrate over everything that I'm showing out on the patio because we have a couple of really high velocity fans that are out there hanging off my wall that are way too noisy to try to talk over. My kiln vent and my room vent, they vent out to the patio out there. It's unfortunately quite cold today. It's like 25 degrees here. I normally don't try to fire when it's this cold. However, my valve, my magnetic baso valve or whatever it's called on the kiln, it went out. I was about halfway through the firing and in early December when I tried to fire it up again on another day, I couldn't get it to light. The valve was bad, so I had to get a new valve in, and it didn't come in time for me to finish the Raku firing before the kids left. So I asked the kids if they wanted me to fire it for them in the Raku kiln, that I would fire those, and those are the ones that I'm firing today. Otherwise, I stuck the other ones in a low fire kiln and I fired those up so I could give them back to them, even though they didn't have any Raku quality about them. So let's go ahead and we'll go out to the patio and you'll see exactly what I'm doing. So this is the way it looks when we walk out to the patio. I have a tarp completely covering the kiln, and you want to make sure that it's always fully over the kiln brick. And over here I have a bucket with a big old cutout, and that is completely covering the valve, and that bucket always has like a heavy brick on top of it. Now these are my reduction chambers, and you can see there's a lot of leaves here because it's fall. Well, I'm going to utilize those leaves as well as my sawdust, so I'm just going to pack in as many of the leaves as I can. I actually like firing during the fall when I've got leaves out there because they really smoke and add a lot of nice reduction to it. But then I want to be safe and make sure that I don't have any combustibles that will start a fire out there. So I make sure that I sweep away the leaves really well from where I could potentially have a fire. Now, I'm testing for wind. There is no wind, which means it's a good day to Raku fire. If it's blustery, it's bad. Now I'm opening up the kiln, and by opening the kiln here, I am just cranking it in a clockwise direction, and it has a little gear, so you want to make sure it's fully engaged and it's not going to fall on you or anything. Now at this point I need to turn the gas on here, that green little valve. When it is in alignment with the pipe, when it's going in the same direction, then you know that the valve is open. The custodian will have to turn on the gas inside the building. I don't have access to that valve. Now you will notice that I also have patties in there. The bisque fired patties will protect the kiln shelf if kids misapply their glaze. I have my long lighter, and I'm going to light the pilot, and I usually do it from inside the kiln. So I'm going to hold the red button on the valve, and then as I put my lighter down there, the pilot will light. That basomagnetic valve, I just push my thumb in, and I have to hold it because the thermocouple is in the flame underneath the kiln, and the thermocouple will heat up, and when it heats up enough, that valve will stay open. But if I just let it go too early, the thermocouple's not hot enough and then it would shut off. Now the blue valve that I'm pointing to right there, that blue valve, that is the valve that will operate the actual flame coming out of the ports. So when I feel that the pilot has heated up the thermocouple enough, then I'll be able to release that button, and I see if it's still lit, and it is lit there. So the thermocouple was hot enough. Now I can turn on the valve. I'm doing this with the kiln open just to show you, see how the flame is coming out of both of the holes on either side. And because this is the first firing of the kiln on this given day, I need to preheat the kiln a bit. If there's any moisture in the kiln, it helps to get it out. I always preheat the kiln for probably about 30 minutes. Then I let it cool off for probably about 5 to 10 minutes, load a kiln, and then I can do the first firing. Okay, so now I'm just preheating this for like 20 to 30 minutes, and I just turned the gas valve off again so there's no flame besides the pilot. And now I can load in some little pots. And by the way, when I was preheating it, it was just partial. I didn't have the flame fully up. It was just to add some warmth to it. It is cold out there. Now I'm just going to preheat that again with a partial flame for maybe like 5-10 minutes just to warm them up. Again, first firing of the day, I usually preheat a little bit more. Now let's talk about the pieces here. So the blue valve, when it is in alignment, like it is right now, the flame is up. So I've gone ahead and I've turned the flame up all the way. This is the magnetic valve that operates the pilot light, and you can see that copper wire, and that goes and it's positioned underneath in the pilot. That is the thermocouple. This little valve right here, that operates the flame of the pilot light, and that is set so it's a good flame. Okay, there are a couple of things that I'm looking for. First of all, I can see the flames are coming out of the top of the peephole. I know that that's going to be ready at this point. I'm going to turn off the gas, so I'm going to walk around. And when I look in, I can see that the pots themselves are shiny, that the glaze is shiny. I often have a student do this next part. If someone has to be dressed appropriately, they have to have on safe footwear. Now, as these are beginning to cool, then I'll start taking them out. If I take them out too soon, it's going to leave a kind of a funky texture where the glaze will hit the sawdust. I'll move this so you can see. All right, so as they start to cool, I'm going to take them out. Now the lidded pots are the hardest of all to pick up. Sometimes I have to remove the lid first. And then if it's real difficult, I have to grab it from the inside. That was kind of a tricky shape there. The square one looks easier. This odd one is going to be weird to pick up. put on my face shield.
So after I put the face shield on, then I'm going to get a bucket of the sawdust, the wood chips. I keep that in a big plastic trash can just out of view, sorry. And now I'm going to add some for reduction, but watch how I hold the lid. I hold the lid as if it's a shield, and then I sprinkle some in. So imagine it's, you know, Captain America's shield, and you're holding it to kind of protect because you're going to get some flame back. And then as I sprinkle in, I'm definitely holding the bucket with my gloves, and I'm using my face shield, and then I'm going to let that have some reduction there. And this is one of our maintenance guys. He's the guy that helped me. We had some issues with the kiln, and he helped to kind of fix it up a little bit for me, so it was working, and he was just coming to check on it. Now I'm taking some additional patties, and I'm putting some patties in there. I'm just setting on top of the old patties just because the old ones have cracked. And now I'm going to load up.
So one thing I'll point out here on this one, this has been wiped down on the interior, the depth of the flange, so it shouldn't stick. They really probably should have wiped a little bit more on that edge. Hopefully that won't get stuck. I tell my kids that I make them wipe it. I tell them exactly what they need to do. I'm not going to wipe it for them, so hopefully they won't get stuck.
And I'm just going to continue loading this kiln. And again, I have the kids make these pieces really small because I am firing for 8 classes worth of kids. So, you know, I've got a couple hundred pots that I'm trying to get through. And I try to have them make them really small, so it will only take me 2 to 3 days of the Raku firing to try to get them done. Normally the kids would come out and watch all this, but because again the kiln was not operational before the end of the semester, I'm having to do this over winter break when the kids aren't there. Now I'm just going to kind of stir up this one a little bit, just make sure that we've got some nice reduction going on in there, and then I'll put the lid back on. The pots that are in the kiln are just slightly warming up at the moment, and I will end up by closing that lid, turning the flame on, and firing those up, and we'll come back when those are done. So it's been about 20 minutes, and I need to go ahead and take the first ones out of the reduction chamber. And as I do that, I will douse them in water to stop the reduction process. I just kind of take them, I douse them in my bucket of water, but I have to make sure that it's oriented with the opening up.
Now, I'm going to douse these in water to stop the reduction, but I want to make sure that I'm not trapping air. So as I do that, I make sure that the hole is up.
I do apologize that the water bucket is out of view there. It's just a plastic water bucket that I have with water. I had to break the ice that morning because it was quite cold. And I'm just quickly dipping the pieces into the water, and then I'm setting them there on the concrete patio to cool. The dousing of it in the water does help to stop the reduction process, so it kind of freezes the glaze in the state that they are. Again, I'm holding the pieces opening up because you don't want to have it opening down or it builds up pressure when you put it in the water. Now, conversely, I could just leave them in the reduction until they fully cool if I wanted to, but because I'm doing an assembly line process, I need to move out this batch, prepare the buckets for the next batch that are just about ready to go in there. So the kiln, you can see the flames are starting to come out of the top of the kiln. This kiln is about ready. I'm just trying to find the last little piece in there because I knew there was an extra piece, and I'm dousing that. All right, so now that I have the reduction buckets are empty, I'm going to go ahead and turn the gas off because I know that that's ready. The flames are definitely coming out of the top. That's the indicator on my kiln. Yours might be a little bit different. Now I'm going to get the 2 reduction buckets ready with more of the wood chips and sawdust. If I had more leaves, I would add more leaves to it. Unfortunately, the custodians cleaned up my patio that morning, so I couldn't do any more leaves. I filmed this over the course of 2 days. And then I'm just adding some more of the wood chips, sawdust. Then I'm going to open up the kiln in the same manner. And of course the flame is off. I turn the flame off before I actually put the sawdust in the bucket. And you can see it starts glowing yellow, and then it goes to orange, and then it'll start to go to deeper red. I do try to take out the white crackle glazes first because those don't seem to get marred by the texture of the wood chips or the sawdust. And then I usually save the coppers for last. And of course that's flaming up there. It's hard to see since the bucket is out of the picture there. Again, lidded pots are always harder, especially I do talk to the kids about making forms that are easy for me to pick up with tongs. 50% of the time they don't do it though, and I have some really challenging forms to pick up with tongs sometimes. Ones that are really rounded and spherical are they give me a lot of stress because sometimes they do slip out of my tongs, and I hate that. When I make something for myself, I always try to engineer it with maybe an angle change, gives it a little neck so I can pick it up a little bit better. I often save the worst shaped forms to pick up until last, because if they slip out of my tongs, they might knock over another piece, which is what happened on the previous load. This one is a bit challenging. He's got some little handles on there, and you can see, you might be able to tell, but I take the tongs and I'm bracing the length of the tongs against my elbows too, because these pieces are really heavy. The tongs are really heavy, so just picking that up and holding the weight of it is difficult sometimes. So I do use my elbows and kind of brace against the end of the tongs. So those are going to get a little bit more of the wood chips and sawdust for a little bit more reduction. And I'm just filling up my bucket with the wood chips at this moment. And honestly, if I were thinking, I would have put my mask on out there, because unlike a campfire, it is just the smokiest. Again, I take it off with the lid in front of me to kind of shield a little bit. And I put that on. But having a mask would be helpful so you're breathing in a little less smoke, because sometimes it's just blinding. There's so smoke. No campfire would be this smoky if you're sitting around a campfire. This is super smoky because that's the intention. You're trying to make smoke and have that reduction.
And again, I'll give that about 20 minutes and I'll load up the next load.
And as I load up this next load here, I'm going to do this in like a faster speed. I have discovered that there was a little flat piece that was still in there that I missed. So I'm going to try to pick it up with these big tongs, but it's very awkward and I can't get it with these big tongs. So I have a second pair of short tongs that are harder to grip a lot of forms, but sometimes they're just right to pick up something super awkward that's maybe a little bit smaller. So these tongs are shorter, and I'm just picking up that piece and then sticking it in the reduction so it gets some smoke. And then I'll continue loading once I get that out of there. There are different styles of tongs, and you have to find what works best for you. I kind of like the long ones, again, because I can brace them against my elbow, because it's a lot of weight that you're trying to pick up, kind of far away from your body. And it's a little hot and toasty in there, but I can still do it with my bare hands. Otherwise, I would be using my glove. But it's also been cooling for a few minutes, so it should be good to load those up. And again, the kids were told to wipe their bottoms. Sometimes they didn't really do it well. And then I'm going to close that, make sure that it's kind of locked in place. And here you can see the next kiln load is about ready to be done, because you can see the flames coming out. You know, this has been another 20 or 30 minutes. And then I'm taking out the ones from the reduction chamber, dousing them in the water just quickly, and then I set them on the patio. And when I set them on the patio, sometimes, you know, they will have gotten some water in them when I douse them, and when they sit on the patio, the water actually will boil off of them. You'll see like a little volcano sometimes with some of the vases. So I'm just trying to empty one reduction chamber. Now I'm going to the second one, and again, carefully pick them up, orienting them top up, douse them in the water. And a lot of times they do have a lot of soot all over them. We'll be cleaning them at the end and really scrubbing them to get all of the soot off. And it looks like maybe I inadvertently dropped one in there. If you do drop one, I just usually just leave it if you can't pick it up easily. And then again, you can see the flames coming out of the top. That kiln is ready. So I'm just checking for a little bit more. Then I'm going to turn off my gas. Open it up. And you can see how it just immediately starts to cool. It goes from yellow to orange and then down to red again. And then here I'm going to be adding a little bit more of the sawdust and wood chips. And then very carefully setting those inside. As careful as I can be. Again, sometimes they pop out of my tongs, which I don't like it when it happens. If they lean against one another in the kiln, they can actually, you know, their glaze can fuse, and then they kiss, and then they're stuck together. So it's a challenge, but I try to be as careful as I can as I pick them up. And then it'll be adding a little bit more of the wood chips. And I take the lid off, and that also has a shock of cold air, and that helps the crackles to form on a lot of the glazes. There we go. Sometimes when I take it off, I'll even have a squirt bottle, and I'll just squirt a pot if I want to have particular crackle on it. And there we go, just loading up another load. So it was a little hot, and I had to resort to wearing my glove in order to put those in there. And I try to position them on a patty so they won't rock or fall over. Particularly challenging forms are forms that don't balance well. I always try to make sure that the kids are making a nice stable form so it's not going to be tippy in the kiln, because the kiln does shake ever so slightly. Even though it's mounted to the patio, it does shake a little bit. And I'm just going to let that preheat a little bit in the kiln, just kind of acclimate before I boost up the temperature. Now here I'm taking the cold ones off the patio, the ones that I can actually pick up from earlier in the day, and I'm putting them on my cart, and I'll be taking those inside so we can clean them up with the scrubber pads and the abrasive cleanser, and make them shiny and pretty. Students do sometimes have a higher breakage rate. Of course, accidents happen, or just the reduction will weaken the clay. If their piece does break, I just glue it back together. I never count off points or anything for a craft issue if it breaks during the Raku firing process, unless you can definitely see that maybe they put something together without scoring and slipping, and they've just, because you have to have really good craft for it to hold up in a Raku kiln. And I also tell kids, never make your pieces out of slabs. because slab pieces definitely tend to crack at the corners. I've had that happen before. Even though I tell kids, use the pinch, use the coil method, maybe wheel thrown if they're the advanced kids. But that is the Raku firing process. And now I'll show you a little bit about how I clean them up. Now, as the pieces come out of the kiln, a lot of times they have quite a bit of soot on them, so we want to knock that off over into the trash can as opposed to in the sink. And then after we knock the soot out, then we're going to be doing some cleaning, and we're going to do that with some of the green scrubber pads that I have. Now the green scrubber pads will help to get off quite a bit of soot, okay, but they may not get off everything. So sometimes you might feel like you need to use a little bit of an abrasive cleanser. I have some of the Comet. Be careful not to get this on clothing, because if you do, it can bleach clothing. Once we do a little bit of the scrubbing, you can really see it brings out a lot of the brightness that was covered up by soot. It's very noticeable on white as well, so like on this little guy. And I was stupid and I tried to pick this up before it was completely cool, and it was really hot and it scared me and I dropped it. It was mine, but I broke his little ears. So I'm going to save these because after it dries, I'm going to glue them back on. So here, again, I'm just going to try to get the soot off and try to really brighten it. And that will help to show the crackle. And this one has a really nice crackle to it. Hopefully you can see that. And lastly, I just wanted to show you some nice examples of some student work that some of my kids did. That's tape resist. The black lines are the unglazed, where it got smoky. This one was a little less black, a little bit more gray. This one is the smoky blue. These are Amico glazes for the most part, by the way, and this sweet little stacked turtle with lustrous copper. And don't forget to subscribe and check me out on social media, and you can see my latest updates.